Opico, Kansas, 2009. A young man walks into a junkyard just on the outskirts of town and hands a technical diagram of a Volkswagen Beetle engine to the person who owns the shop and says, I'm looking for this specific part right here. And the owner of the shop says, sure, go ahead. Now, this junkyard is one of those junkyards where you have rows and rows and rows of cars for parts. So you pay a fee to get in, and you take up to 5 parts of any kind you want out of that junkyard. And so the young man, his name is David, walks into the junkyard and finds the 3 parts he needs for his Volkswagen off of the body of another exact model, the same model. He realizes he has 2 slots left to fill with parts, and he's wandering around the car part section of the junkyard, wondering what kind of car parts he can take. When all of a sudden he comes across in the very back of the junkyard, and this junkyard's been here since 1925, and covered under a tarp at the very edge of this junkyard is an almost complete Ford Model T. You know what a Ford Model T is, right? The Ford. I don't have to explain what a Ford Model T is, right? Do I? No. Anyway, so he finds a completely, well, a restorable Ford Model T, a Model T. Yep. And he knows that if the junkyard owner realizes that he has a very valuable car on his hands, because he looks at this Model T and he's used to restoring cars, and he thinks, yes, if I get all the right parts, if I make some of the parts myself, I do believe I'll be able to restore this Ford Model T. And Ford Model Ts are very valuable when fully restored. So he hatches a plan to drag the Ford Model T out of the junkyard before the man notices that he is taking away a very valuable car, especially for its parts. Parts to a Ford Model T are worth a lot of money. They're very rare, original Ford Model T parts. And so the next day, he grabs 2 random car parts to fill his quota. The next day, he goes up to the Ford Model T and just thinks to himself, well, maybe I can get away with this. And so he grabs, over the next week and a half, of the next 11 days, he goes there every day, 5 parts from that Model T, and brings them home. And at this point in time, his only mission is to sell them on eBay for a big price. This is in 2009, so eBay exists. So yeah, his did I say 2009 at the beginning? I think I did. So back to the story. The Ford Model T parts, every last one of them, are in very good condition, actually. And he, over the course of 11 days, he strips that Ford Model T of everything except the frame. And then he thinks to himself, I think I can get away with stealing, air quotes, this frame of the Ford Model T, because I think it must be worth a lot of money too. Problem is that this junkyard doesn't allow you to take, or at least the way the man runs this junkyard. And at the same time, he's starting to get a little bit suspicious about the reason why this random young guy from the town is coming here every day to take parts off of the cars in the lot. So the 12th time that this kid comes in just to grab the last part he knows of, the junkyard owner says to him, I want to walk with you while you're checking these parts out, because I don't know what you're doing here. This is the 12th time in a row that you have come here and picked parts from my shop. I want to see what you're doing out there. So the owner of the junkyard follows the young man, David, out to the junkyard. And David heads to the opposite end of the junkyard because he doesn't want this man to know that he has a Ford Model T on his hands. And he just rips the cloth off of a car, pretending to, and then bam, right there is a Ford Model A. And the owner of the junkyard, his eyes go wide. He says, is this what you found in my junkyard? You do. And he says, well, legally, you own all those parts that you've taken from this Ford Model A. Because David said, I took it from Model T. But, and then he gets an idea. And he goes to the junkyard owner and he says, "There's a Ford Model T on the other side of this place." And he says, "Oh my God, what else is in this junkyard?" Right. Uh, in exchange for helping you search this place for more valuable restorable cars, says the guy, the owner of the shop, "you give me the rest of that Ford Model T." And he says, "Deal, because you seem to have a good eye for these things and a good luck for these things." And David asked the shop owner, "When was the last time you took an inventory of the cars that were here?" And he said, "I bought this place in 2002 from a guy who was retiring, and I never actually been this deep into it." And David says, "I don't think anybody has." So for the next week, they run around this place and they find 2 other Model Ts, 1 more Model A, and 17 other cars from before 1945 in there. And also about 100 very rare cars, very rare vintage cars from before 1980. And David says, "I can help you. I'm a car mechanic. I know how to put these cars back together. We could make a lot of money here." And the shop owner, whose name is Ryan, says, "Yes, we really need a lot of money. I'm not a car mechanic. I'm hiring you to restore all of these cars." And David says, "That's a good gig for me." So for the next year and a half, David and Ryan walk around the junkyard all day long, looking for parts to restore the cars they're restoring. In 2012, there are 3 fully restored cars: a fully restored Model A fully restored Model T, and a fully restored Ford Challenger, I think, from 1965. And they send them to auction. Now, here's where the interesting part happens. Because these cars were reconstructed from junkyard parts, they don't have any registration. And the idiot, Ryan, did not realize that in order for a car to be properly auctioned off, it needs registration. And they can't get any registration for these cars because they can't show proof of ownership. And it's a big legal battle. For about 3 years after these 3 cars are sold at auction, for $100,000 for the Model A, about $400,000 for the Model T, and about $50,000 for the Challenger. For about 3 years, the county is suing the owner of the junkyard, Ryan, for forced marching, I think is the correct term for it. Well, legally, they're in trouble because they did not register these cars because they just neglected to. And eventually, Ryan wins the lawsuit because he proves that he owns the lot and everything on it, which includes the dead cars on that lot. So he proves he has proof of ownership for the junkyard. He just doesn't have proof of ownership for each individual car on the junkyard. And what the judge decides, in a landmark case actually, is that because he owned the land and the objects on the land in his contract, he therefore has proof of ownership for the cars that he found on that land. And all he has to do is go to the DMV and register them. Ding! Problem solved. Well, word gets out, actually, that this junkyard has a treasure trove of old cars with vintage parts. And so Ryan goes from charging around $100 per entry to $3,000 per entry. And pilgrims from all over the world, actually, come to this tiny little town did I say Kansas? I think I said Kansas. This tiny little town. Pilgrims from all over the world come here to search for parts for their cars. And that's the story of Materdo Car Parts. The end. I'll catch you later.